Following the release of Dead Cells, the game received a paid DLC content expansion titled The Bad Seed in February of 2020. It introduced players to 2 new biomes and a new boss fight, each with their own new and unique items and enemies to freshen up the future runs of players. Complete with these new biomes was new lore that helped ground these new biomes to the world already established in the game. Let's take some time and go over the stories of the Dilapidated Arboretum, the Morass of the Banished, and the Nest. The grand halls of High Peak Castle wasn't the only treat that nobles visiting the realm got to experience during their stay. The king also had luxurious gardens where royals could frolic and lounge at their leisure. Maintained by a servant known as the gardener, the sprawling greenery, bubbling fountains, and fresh air offered a reprieve for the aristocrats, a place to read and relax, to escape the labors of the court and its stuffy ways. That is, however, until the malaise swept over the realm and everything devolved into chaos. The denizens of the kingdom mutated into foul creatures, but they weren't the only ones affected. Animals like rats and crows that came in contact with the malaise also underwent transformations, becoming monstrous forms of their pre-infection selves. But in the Arboretum of the gardener, there was a mutation unlike all the others. Here, the very plants of the garden were affected by the disease. The Venus flytraps grew in size, and their diet evolved from unsuspecting insects to things with a little more meat on them. Mushrooms of the greenhouses sprouted arms and legs, and with their new human-like forms, started walking the greenhouses of the Arboretum. The small ones would crash into people to harm them, or be used as weapons by the larger ones. If these larger mushroom men couldn't find a smaller one to lob at their target, they would throw rocks at them, or use their immense strength to launch them across the greenhouses. This botanical phenomenon was of immense interest to the alchemist, who obtained one of these organisms for himself, and conducted experiments on it in the castle. In one of his grimoires, he describes how the fruit of his labor led him to create a strange half-plant, half-man hybrid, but at the cost of the volunteer's life. This result led him to abandon the hope of a botanical solution to the malaise, needing to find something that a volunteer could live through. However, the fact that a man-like plant seems to be taking over one of the wings of the castle would imply that the results of this experiment differed from his conclusions. The alchemist wasn't the only one conducting botanical experiments on the monsters of the malaise. The gardener was seemingly involved as well, producing similarly unusual results as well, like one that resulted in the bodies of infected individuals bursting from a large tree connected to a vat containing a large crow skull, the entrails of various organisms, and bits of roots and plants. Despite the weirdness surrounding them, the gardener was able to glean some information from his experiments. In particular, he determined that it was the water that led to the mutations being observed in the creatures of the Arboretum, supporting the theory that the water supply had been tainted somehow, a finding later progressed by the alchemist. But before he could progress his theories further, he was arrested and imprisoned within the prisoners' quarters for an unknown crime. Given the king's paranoia, he could easily have been accused of being infected, or perhaps his association with the alchemist, who wasn't the most popular figure amongst the king's supporters, earned him some enemies who saw fit to imprison him and eliminate one of the allies of the scientist. Whatever the case, the gardener was locked within his cell, awaiting the day of his release. But as the days passed and the ravages of the malaise progressed further and further, and the cruelties of the crown got worse and worse, he, like so many others, abandoned hope for the salvation of the realm, and chose to end his life, leaving his precious Arboretum dilapidated and ruined, sharing the same fate as the rest of the kingdom. As the pipes of the Arboretum and the sewer system of the realm wound away from the kingdom, they emptied into a swamp in a low-lying part of the island. This marshy area of the island was home to a group of people known as the Banished. They were undesirables from the kingdom that didn't deserve a place amongst the rest of the populace, a fate that typically fell to the sick and the poor, and their new home was in a harsh environment. The foul waters of the sewer collected into stagnant pools full of waste, which made for perfect breeding grounds for parasites. Winged, biting insects filled the air. Leeches swam in the pools, looking for a waiting limb to latch onto. And ticks filled the brambles, waiting for an opportune moment to attach to a bloated host to drain blood from. To protect from these dangers, the Banished made their abodes in the trees of the swamp, away from the filthy water and disease-ridden bugs that they shared their home with. But they still lived a hard life, filled with danger. And to top it all off, this was before the malaise. As that dark infection permeated the water supply, infecting all those in the realm, the water eventually found its way to the Morass of the Banished, making the harsh lives of its denizens even worse. Not only was the water that surrounded them undrinkable because of the waste and the excrement from the sewers, now it was infected with the malaise. It wasn't long before some of the Banished underwent the transformation that so many others on the island had gone through. However, it wasn't just the Banished that suffered from the changes of the malaise. The ticks of the swamp were affected as well, growing in size, power, and speed, becoming giant monsters. And at the end of each day, they swarmed from their nest on a bloodthirsty hunt for their mother, whose own malaise-prompted transformation prompted astonishing growth seen in no other creature afflicted with the disease. Fear-stricken, the Banished decided upon unconventional means to their tick conundrum. Instead of fighting the brood, they decided to appease it. Knowing what the ticks hunted for, the Banished offered up the only thing that could appease them: blood. Fresh blood. And in the swamps they called home, there was only one place to get that. The Banished thus created a religion centered on their sacrifices to their holy maternal figure, Mama Tick, offering up dozens, if not hundreds, of their bodies to the creatures, all in an effort to continue living their lives in this harsh environment with her grace and blessings. You know, it's funny. Out of all the denizens of the island, the Banished were the ones that should have been wiped out the fastest. Nearly every facet of their environment could easily and quickly kill them, and the malaise only compounded these dangers. Yet, despite that, they were the only people left alive on the island after the ravages of the disease. Perhaps it's more accurate to say that it's actually due to their way of life, the changes and adaptations they'd had to make to survive in the swamp, avoiding drinking infected water, developing fighting skills to fight off the parasites, and eventually monsters of their home, offering up fresh corpses to the ticks to eat, thereby disposing of them before they could turn from the malaise, that allowed them to survive where even the king, locked up in his castle with countless legions of soldiers, could not. It's an ironic twist that only reinforces the underlying message of the story of the fallen king and his ruined kingdom. That if he were as adaptable as those he deemed not good enough to live in his kingdom, maybe the realm wouldn't be filled with monsters and ruins, and maybe he and its people would still be alive to this day. But that brings an end to the stories of the Dilapidated Arboretum, the Morass of the Banished, and the Nest. I sincerely hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions or anything, feel free to ask and I'll do my best to answer them. But until next time, thank you for watching and see you later.